Hi, my name is Bill Fantegrossi, and I'm assistant professor in pharmacology and toxicology in the College of Medicine here at UAMS. I'm a behavioral pharmacologist by training, and what that means is that my primary research interests generally center on the interaction between brain and behavior, and how drugs might change these interactions in interesting ways. Since the brain is the organ which controls behavior, my lab focuses almost exclusively on drugs that affect the central nervous system, and primarily that's going to be drugs of abuse, but it's also sometimes psychotherapeutics. And today what I'd like to do is briefly describe some of the research that's actively going on in the lab right now. The first project that I'd like to tell you about concerns adverse early life experiences and how those can change the susceptibility of individuals to drugs later in life. So we now know from a range of studies that include epidemiological studies in humans, all the way down to studies done at the cellular level, that adverse early life events can predispose individuals to drug abuse during adolescence and then further on into adulthood as well. And of particular interest to us in this research project is the fact that exposure to pain early in life can elicit lasting changes in sensory processing, including changes in pain sensitivity that remain across development. Now, these changes in behavior can also be accompanied by neuroadaptations in brain opioid systems, and that can result in either an increased or a decreased sensitivity to the effects of opioid drugs such as morphine. Along these lines, we're specifically interested in how early life experience with visceral pain, such as a premature infant may experience in a neonatal intensive care unit when subjected to procedures like airway intubation and gastric suction, and how those procedures may predispose these individuals to opioid abuse as they grow older. So specific questions for this research project include things like what are their opioid receptor mechanisms that underlie this altered sensitivity to opioid drugs? Are there pharmacological or perhaps behavioral interventions which could be developed to protect this vulnerable population from developing opioid abuse later in life? And finally, how do these findings guide analgesic options for premature infants, both during the invasive procedures that they may encounter shortly after birth, as well as further into development when they need to be treated for anything involving pain. Another major focus in the lab concerns emerging drugs of abuse. So drugs of abuse are always sort of coming and going on the streets, and there are both legal and public health reasons to learn more about them as fast as we can. In Arkansas, but really all across the United States, one of the fastest growing new drugs of abuse are synthetic cannabinoids. These are drugs that have been made in laboratories, and they are designed to mimic marijuana. These drugs are typically marketed under the name K2 or Spice, and we don't have a lot of information about the pharmacological effects of these drugs. In addition to that, there are no standard regulations from state to state or even from municipality to municipality surrounding the possession or distribution of these drugs. And so because of that, they've been sold over the counter, oftentimes to first-time drug users, in places from convenience stores to truck stops to head shops. And we know very little about what these drugs actually do biologically. And we know that they're basically marketed as both a safe and a legal alternative to marijuana. Now, what these K2 or Spice preparations typically consist of are plant materials which, at least at this time, we believe are inert, that have been sprayed with concentrations of synthetic cannabinoid drugs that have been cooked up in a lab somewhere, designed, again, to mimic the effects of marijuana. Now, which drugs are actually present in these samples? We don't know necessarily. What's the dose from sample to sample? We don't know, but it varies quite a bit. We've seen some samples that contain more than one of these synthetic drugs, and we know very little about what happens when they're combined and co-administered together. So in fact, we know so little about these emerging cannabinoids that it's almost scary. But the preliminary studies that we've done so far suggest that these compounds may be very different from marijuana, which is largely considered to be relatively safe among the drugs of abuse. And these synthetic cannabinoids actually elicit some unique and potentially pretty dangerous effects. So a final research project in the lab is focused on drugs that are coming from natural origin. So we work with a natural products chemist who has identified compounds that appear to be biologically active. He takes plant material, then optimizes them and sends them to us. And what we do is we test these different drugs And the goal here is to come up with something that may be a therapeutic against psychostimulant abuse. So these would be things like methamphetamine or ecstasy. Those drugs have all sorts of untoward effects in users, and we really don't have any specific medications to treat these people. So by working with medicinal chemists with some of these novel compounds that have never before existed in nature, we're able to screen them, find drugs with biological activity, send that information back. That information is then used to optimize them pharmacologically to get them to do exactly what we want, hopefully reduce some side effects. And we've had some decent success with these so far from a series of compounds that are designed to attenuate the effects of ecstasy.